Hi there, friends. I'm Scott Wakefield, lead pastor of First Christian Church of Greene County, Tennessee. Joined tonight with
Mike Schubert.
Joined by Mike Schubert, and we're here to have a coffee convo. Mike basically refused to come along on that one. So we're glad you're here tonight.
That was actually a good effort of my part.
That was much better than earlier. We're glad you're here tonight. This is live, so jump in the comments. Let us know you're here. Ask some questions, help direct the conversation, and add some good stuff so that we can get to know Mike a little bit better. This is a chance to have some good coffee and some good convo with some good friends. So Mike is an FCC Elder here, and we're going to get to know him and hear about the work of God in his life. So we're glad you're here. So Mike.
Scott.
Who are you and how'd you get here today? How did you get to who you are today?
Got it.
Not to this space and this place.
Drove in the rain.
Family history, personal history, where are you from, all that good stuff. What's it mean to be Mike Schubert?
Managed chaos. That's what it means.
Managed the chaos.
So I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and I moved into my 15th house. So I'm not 45 yet, so that's about just under average 3 years less. So moved around quite a bit as a kid, some as an adult with career. Mm-hmm. When we got to Greenville, Tennessee, after we'd been here for a little bit, we adopted 2 children, mm-hmm. and our oldest other children were getting to the point where they're getting close to high school, so we decided to put down roots. Mm-hmm. So we've been here now, be 10 years in March, as long as I lived anywhere in my life.
Tell us about growing up a Schubert in your family as a kid.
We moved around a lot,
yeah.
So we were tight. I had a little brother who I referred to as the daughter my mom always wanted. Just kidding, Dave.
He's not kidding. He's put that in so that Dave will hear that later.
So we moved around a lot, so we were tight. So, we grew up playing Monopoly, Risk, riding bikes, riding motorcycles with my dad.
I've heard you talk about motorcycles a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That transition to when I was 16, me and my dad used to go on motorcycle trips together on the street. We did Daytona, did Sturgis a few times. Just real tight family. So we attended church, but I don't know that I would say we were a Christian family. We were a moral family. Dave, I believe, got saved a little after I went to college. He was 2 years behind me in school. I got saved when I was 20, mostly through the influence of my wife and my little brother, and some other friends that God had kind of put in my path.
Yeah.
So I got saved when I was 20 and got married when I was 21, and several moves and 6 kids later.
Here we are.
Here we are.
How did you and Amanda meet?
So my freshman year, a guy lived across the hall from me that she grew up with.
Okay. This is at Clemson.
At Clemson. So we both were in summer school that year after our freshman year. I went to see if Andy wanted to do lunch. Amanda went to see if Andy wanted to do lunch. We all went to lunch together. And
Mike, Amanda, Andy.
Yep. And Amanda and I basically didn't leave each other's sight for like 7 days, after which I told her I had no interest in seeing anybody else. And the rest is history.
After 7 days, you announced.
I just knew.
You announced to her, this is how this is going to work.
Well, she checked all the boxes. She loved Jesus. She was family-oriented. She thought I was funny.
Wow.
That was it.
Wow. That definitely takes a special woman. Good stuff. Let's do personality.
Okay.
What kind of a personality profile are you?
I'm an 8.
You're an 8 for Enneagram?
Yep. So
what is an 8?
High justice, strong leader. I'm the type of person.
So on Myers-Briggs, you're a J. High yes. J, not a P.
I've gotten better at P.
Okay. But you're not naturally. Not naturally a P.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a judger.
Okay.
So I'm the type of person that if I feel like there is injustice, I will insert tension or I will attack tension. Conflict does not bother me. In fact, I almost feel drawn to it.
Yeah.
If I feel like someone is not getting a fair shake.
Yeah.
So it's not that I like it. I don't like that it exists.
It doesn't settle well with
me.
Yeah.
I don't like conflict, but I'm not afraid of it either.
Yeah.
Because my overarching personality is that things have to be right. Just because they have to be right.
So you're pretty black and white.
Kinda. At least that's the way I started. Gotten very gray.
Now that you have 6 kids and you've been married a good long while,
I parent.
You're approaching mid-40s.
I parent completely different. And if you ever have Samuel on here, my second son, he can attest to how things have changed
to the
last few years.
The journey, the evolution
Yep.
of your parenting.
Yeah.
We should talk about that. Are you a thinker or a feeler?
Thinker. When I take a spiritual gifts test, mercy doesn't even register.
Merciless Mike.
I don't try to be that way, but I am so strong in other attributes that the mercy just is. Yeah. It just gets short shift.
Mercy and serving and gifts of mercy, that kind of stuff, is the highest of all the spiritual gifts. Acts of service and mercy are the highest one there is.
I believe it, and I've always thought.
And I've never really.
You've never seen it from me?
I've never been on that, and neither have you.
I've always thought that when we get to heaven, that I will probably be serving other people, and I'll be just fine with that.
Yeah,
that'll be my makeup.
On the disc profile,
high D. Not as high as you, but pretty high.
And you must be
yellow. Yellow's my next highest.
Okay.
And blue and green are really low.
Okay. So D and I are both higher, and S and C are a little bit lower.
Yeah.
And what's the difference between adapted? If you're not familiar and you're watching disc profile, is who am I at work and who am I at home? But it's dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness.
Yeah.
And so it's especially how does that work out at work and how does that work out at home, and are there differences? Are they the same? Is your work and home similar, or does it change much?
So the last time I took something similar to that, because there's another one that's out there that's real similar. The colors are identical.
Yeah.
My natural and my adaptive were identical.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did not sway.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, how's that different now, perhaps with parenting differences?
Well, I can force myself to move. And the other one was more of a wheel, and the further out you get from center, the more like red you are, the more D you are on that one. So I was dead center red. And I have to force myself to transition more towards the center to be more of a, be more in tune with the context with which a situation is occurring.
Awareness of the context and not just, this is the way this should be.
That's like the Mandalorian, this is the way.
Yeah.
That's
your natural thing.
That's my natural thing, but it doesn't really work that great.
What makes you that way, do you think? Some of that's just
because
who God made you to be.
That's part of being an 8, I think, and who God made me to be. As a leader, ideally you have a vision for the way things should be. Yeah. And the way things should be are not really dependent on the circumstance. They should just be that way. And so as you try to disciple your children into either better versions of you or better versions of who they are, you don't always get to do things the way you want. And Samuel and I have joked about it a little bit, that him and I are so alike, and I don't take direction well, and neither does he. Mm-hmm. So when I am directive towards him, it just doesn't work. So it's not that, it's almost, sometimes it feels like we're doing a little bit of a dance. Like we're careful to speak to each other in a way that doesn't trigger each other.
Sure.
We have very similar triggers.
Well, that's part of training a child in the way they should go.
Right.
Yeah, and the Hebrew word behind some of that in there is how that kid is made by God in a way that may be different than another kid. And so it's particular to the child.
Yeah.
So tell us something about you most people likely don't know.
All right. So I like to get in four-wheel drive vehicles and go places I haven't been.
Yeah.
And so my kids and I are on a segmented trip across America. There's a trail called the Trans-America Trail, which we've loosely followed from Hatteras to Vegas. So we're close. We're 1 or 2 segments left from getting to the Oregon coast.
Cool.
We've had a lot of good, fun times. It's not always the same children on the trip. It's the same core.
Yeah.
I think Jeremiah's gone on all of them.
Oh, really?
I think. Michael's been on most. Samuel's been on most. Faith was on the one we went out to Colorado and Utah. So we just go. People ask me, so where do you stay and where do you plan to stay? I was like, I don't know. We'll just see when we get there. They're like, what do you mean you'll just see when you get there?
The plan is to figure out the plan as you go.
It's called boondocking. You go until you. And there's apps to help with that, but you just kind of figure it out as you go. I mean, when the week we were supposed to do Tennessee. On the morning, the beginning of the second morning, day 2, my boys said, Dad, it would be really cool if we went to New Orleans. I said, New Orleans is not in Tennessee and it's not on this trip. But it'd be great to go to New Orleans. I said, all right. So we took a left and swung down to New Orleans.
Yeah.
And
you had the flexibility to do that.
I had the flexibility to do that.
My dad's family, my dad was from the middle of nowhere, south central Illinois. And they would make a habit of, on Sundays, as they're doing the family drive, because it was a thing to do the family drive on Sunday after church, they'd go to somewhere for lunch, and then they would say, all right, which way are we turning? And they would do that every Sunday.
Yeah.
Eventually, they made that their vacation plan. So they would get to the end of the driveway, and they'd say, which way are we turning? And they'd do that all the way and explore.
That's awesome.
Yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so we have a few good questions.
Okay.
You mentioned you've adopted 2 of your 6.
Yep.
We've adopted 1 of our 3. Someone says, what advice would both of you give to couples considering adoption?
You're going to get a ton of advice.
Yes.
Tons. Most of the people don't know what they're talking about.
Uh-huh.
And don't listen to the people that do have adoptive kids or they're going to scare you out of it. Just go for it.
It's one of those, if you knew enough beforehand, you might not say yes.
Yeah. You can never know enough.
Right.
It's like regular parenting. You just don't know what you don't know until you do it.
And that's not just adoption. That's most adult things in life that are harder than you could possibly have thought.
Right. And at some point, those kids will probably bring you to the end of yourself quicker than your typical kids or your what's the word for it? Biological kids.
Why do you say that?
Because most kids that end up getting adopted come from trauma backgrounds or super hard places.
Yeah.
And even if that was only in utero, like one of ours, it still is going to play its way out in their lives. And you're not going to be able to solve it. There's going to be issues you can't solve. And some days
you're going to think, where does that come from? Or how did that happen? And you'll see these patterns and realize, oh, yeah.
And my wife is amazing at figuring out the root of that stuff and then developing solutions for it. But there's no 100% solution.
Right. Yeah.
You don't fix someone that was born with illegal drugs in their body and just think that their personality is going to be perfect. Yeah. It's just not.
Well, and one lesson that I'm finding that's an implication of that is it's not particularly all that different with my biological kids in that there are things where I go, oh, yeah, I'm not fixing that. I'm going to help. I'm going to do the best I can. They're living in a broken world. Depravity is real in them.
Right.
And whether it's like a in the womb trauma or some other sort of difficult thing out of which the foster or adoptive kid came out of, we're all dealing with that kind of stuff.
And as I get older, I feel like it's not my role to solve it. I can't be Jesus for them.
Right.
And for a lot, I think for some of my children, well, for all of my children, but especially for my adoptive ones that have got special needs that are more visible and evident, it is what is going to bring them to a saving faith, because they're going to realize that they can't do life on their own.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, it's almost like they've got a little bit of an advantage, because they're not typical, and it's so obvious, and their challenges are so much greater. So in some
you're more
way,
in tune with those things,
yeah,
and aware and adapting because of them.
Yeah, and hopefully we raise them in a way where they have an awareness of it.
Sure.
And which hopefully leads to a very strong awareness of their own depravity, which leads to Jesus.
Let's talk about this a little bit. There are different ideas and philosophies about how open are you about their own adoptive or foster or adoptive story or not. How have you guys navigated some of that? We know family, and there are people who, from day one, they're bringing out the picture books and talking about biological stuff, or they're not. There's a whole continuum. How have you guys navigated some of that?
So we come from the weird line where when our kids ask us if Santa's real, we say no.
Spoiler alert, all y'all outside.
Because we have always felt like there is going to be much bigger questions in life.
Yeah.
And we don't ever want there to be a point where they go back to, well, mom and dad weren't truthful about this, or they being truthful about that.
Huh.
So it starts with, when Jeremiah said, when I came out of your tummy, and mom said, we didn't come out of my tummy, we got you to the hospital.
Right.
So
and sort of the natural stuff
it's just the natural stuff, and you don't give them any more than they can handle. And
that applies to kids wherever they're coming from. And some kids need some more stuff earlier, where you're intentionally telling them some things before they may even be aware or asking.
Yeah.
Because that just becomes a part of their story, and you've insinuated that from the beginning, and it's helpful for them because of that. Some other kids may be different for different reasons. Yeah, that's good.
And so it's just been a steady progression. So at this point, Jeremiah knows that he knows the name of his birth mom. And at some point, we will arrange for them to meet in a very safe environment. Because he's got a right to know. And he's always been very verbal. And I think that's part of some of those. One of the pros of his issues is that he is able to communicate the way he's feeling extremely well. I think a piece of that's just because Amanda has done such a good job of helping him.
Both of those are definitely true. I've seen that in
communicate.
Yeah.
So if he's feeling angry, he will tell you, I am feeling angry. And sometimes he can say that before he acts out on it.
He's got a lot of emotional intelligence in that way. You can see it early on. Yeah.
So, it'll just play out naturally.
Let's close with this, and you implied this at the beginning. There's an extent to which the preparation stuff and advice for how you deal with things is not as helpful as, although there's plenty of advice along the way.
Yeah.
There are plenty of resources, good things.
And you should prepare to the extent you can.
And you definitely should. There's no doubt about it. Trauma-informed things, being aware of those kinds of things. Empowered to Connect is a great curriculum for that.
Which we've used a lot of.
Yeah, we have used it too. Empowered to Connect has great stuff. But if God says we as the people of God have a responsibility to care for foster kids,
orphans
kids
and widows
who need to be adopted,
orphans, James.
If that's what we're called to do, and we have a sense that we're called to do that, then we do it.
Yep.
And the rest will be fine.
Right.
It'll be hard, but the rest will be fine. You'll figure it out.
Well, I firmly believe that, the adoption of Lydia took 3 years. If I had known if I had known what was going to happen 3 years prior, I probably would have said no.
Oh, I remember the process you guys went through. It was
So if I had said no, I would not have grown, and I would not be ready for whatever God's preparing me for next.
And to be her daddy.
To be her daddy.
The way she needs now.
And that may not be the ultimate end of what God's doing in my life.
Right.
I mean, I don't know where he's taking me.
That's probably the pinnacle. In terms of the importance to the kingdom.
In some sense, yes.
Yeah.
But my spiritual growth has been one of steps.
Sure.
And every one I've taken, if I had known before how hard it was going to be, I would have been tempted to say no.
Yeah. So the obedience to doing the good and right thing that God puts on your heart, that's the thing.
You just got to do it.
Yeah.
And be
the
thankful.
advice is say yes.
be thankful for the sanctification that comes along the way.
Yep. Good stuff. My wife says, thank you, Mike, for you and your family service to FCC. You're from Cincinnati as a part of your getting to here. Favorite Cincinnati treat, Graters, Skyline, La Rosa's. This is a good one. We could go on this one for a while.
Oh, man. I do like Skyline Conies.
Okay.
And they have...
I strangely like the cheese that comes on Skyline stuff. I don't like cheese.
Which is weird for you.
I know it's weird, but I'll do Skyline. I acquired that one.
So
that taste.
I would say I was in college. I was a functioning alcoholic, and I probably drank too much bourbon and whiskey. But Graters has a seasonal bourbon ice cream, which is
Graters
so
is
as
the
a
best.
Non-drinker.
It's the best.
You've
had a lot of that.
I don't know if that's feeding my addiction, but it sure is tasty because I like ice cream too.
Well, we just trade one for another. Graters is amazing.
The ice cream doesn't lower my inhibition and tempt me to do things I shouldn't. So it's not that big a deal.
Why did you say yes to being an elder at First Christian Church?
Well, I just looked at the other options. I felt I was probably the best solution.
You had this sense of justice about the right thing for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I actually said no a few times. I just didn't feel like it was the right thing to do at that time. And Steve Dewar was still here, and I think he was the one that always asked me. And when we would leave the conversation with, "I'm probably going to come back and ask you again next year, Mike." I said, "Well, I appreciate it. I'm honored. I'm flattered that you would do that." I said, if it's the right time, I'll let you know. I can tell you right now, it's not. And I don't know, maybe the third time he said, I felt like, my wife and I talked about it, we prayed on it. It just felt like I could fit it in, so to speak. Because there's seasons of my life that are so busy.
I think at the time, you hadn't started maybe even the adoption process, but I think you had been talking and praying and thinking about it. And at the time also, I think you weren't yet sure, are we laying roots here long term?
Right.
That was a part of that vocational work stuff that was in the balance for you.
So, what was the original question? The why?
Why did you say yes to being an elder at FCC?
So I'm not probably the biggest theologian on the elder board. I've studied a lot, but my skills are in other areas, and if they can help out the church and the kingdom, great. Yep. I think I kind of have a little bit, not a unique role, but the role I play on the board is, less. It's not the Mark Liebert's role. Mark's the theologian, right? He's the one that's got scripture for everything.
Well,
you do an okay job too.
And when we're in a conversation, and there's this thing back here that started the conversation, and that's this. We need to make sure we answer the question in some actual practical terms.
Yeah.
And the conversation has been going and going and going. You're pretty good at saying, let's not forget, this is that question we're answering back here.
And what's the action plan? Who owns it? What's
so
the
what
timing?
are we doing next because of that?
I want to see an action tracker. I want to see it.
Yeah. And now that we've had this conversation, who's in charge of what, when? And
Yeah. And that's just training.
Yep.
At work.
So speaking of work, what do you do?
I work at a company called Artisan, which is local. I've been there a little over a year now, and we do everything zinc. We're the largest zinc rolling company in the United States, which includes a lot of penny blanks. So,
world's largest maker of penny blanks.
I think we have made more coin blanks than anybody in the history of the world. 300 billion plus.
Wow.
I mean, that's a large number.
That's a big number.
300 billion is a large number.
Unless you're, doing government finances. And, I got some good leadership in further serious things. to ask you, but we've got a couple other questions to ask before I get into that. What's your go-to family-approved home-cooked meal? Your favorite family-approved home-cooked meal?
Cabbage biscuits.
What?
Yeah.
What the heck are Cabbage Biscuits?
So I
know what cabbage is.
In the
I
middle,
know what a biscuit is.
So the Schuberts are from about 40 minutes outside of Berlin. And in the 1800s, the czars of Russia told the Germans, if you'll come and establish farms, we'll give you the land. So the Schuberts immigrated to Russia, then found out they weren't telling the truth, so we immigrated right back out.
They were lying, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so other than a few possessions, we took back a recipe for Cabbage Biscuits. So we're not Russian, but Cabbage Biscuits is a Russian recipe in a German family.
It does sound grossly
it's fantastic.
Russian or German. Now,
It's
is
so
this
good.
is this a biscuit with cabbage in it?
No, Cabbage Biscuit is a roll, and if you do it the way my grandmother does it, to make the bread, you boil potatoes and use potato water to make the rolls. And so you make regular bread and you roll it out in little pockets, and then you put highly seasoned and browned onions, cabbage, and ground beef in this little pocket. You roll it over and you finally bake it.
That's definitely German/Russian.
Oh, it's so good.
No
man.
question.
And it takes forever unless you buy frozen bread out of the Walmart freezer. Then you get it faster, and it's not as good, but it saves you 3 hours.
Well, that was not what I was expecting. That was not the...
It's hard to do, and it's a special treat. We get only like once or twice a year at our house.
Cabbage Biscuits.
Cabbage Biscuits.
We had one Cincinnati and Ohioan say, actually a Columbusan, but an Ohioan say, yes, that's delicious, but Buckeye Blitz is better. Buckeye Blitz is pretty good.
I've not had Buckeye. I've had Buckeyes, but I don't know what Buckeye Blitz is.
Well, it's I think it's I had it this year or last year. It is a peanut butter ice cream with chocolate in it.
Can you get it bourbon flavored?
A favorite book of the Bible?
Colossians.
I knew it. I was waiting for you to say it.
Love Colossians. Love it. I love it. It's so Colossians was written a little bit before Ephesians, we think. And Ephesians is kind of more of a developed version of Colossians. Mm-hmm. But Colossians is really about focusing on the core of the core of the core. Who is Jesus, and what do we do with that?
Yeah.
And it is just the verses, chapter 1, verses 15 through 19 are just, they're almost creedal, but they capture the essence of Jesus Christ so succinctly and clearly. I fall in love with that. And I also love chapter 3 where it talks about putting the flesh to death, which is just like an active way of not exercising your sin muscles.
Yeah.
And letting it atrophy.
Put on the new self. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Let the word of Christ dwell in you bodily.
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff.
I love Colossians. I've studied it many, many times.
So, what do you think in your experience, work, home, church, what makes for a good leader?
Well, I will use the definition of a man. The definition of a man is one who rejects passivity, accepts responsibility, leads courageously, and expects a greater reward, God's reward. That's leadership.
Go through those again, slower, so that we can simmer.
You reject passivity.
Mm-hmm.
You don't let life happen to you. You accept responsibility. You're responsible for your actions.
Yeah.
You lead courageously. You lead out in whatever way you're called, whether it's as a father, as an employee, as someone who works on a line, or someone who manages other people.
According to the needs of the moment, the person, the context. Yeah.
And you expect a greater reward. This life is temporal, and we work for the next one.
Yep. Where'd you get that?
Robert. He is what the same.
I've forgotten.
Out of Little Rock, the same church that one of the Family Life guys is at.
Yeah.
And he did a series called Men's Fraternity.
That's right.
Which I did in Rockford with a bunch of guys. And it was one of those, everybody has a few peak moments in their life. Sometimes it's at college, like your best, Christian experiences at college. 'Cause you got people that are focused and everybody's on fire. Doing Men's Fraternity was phenomenal. It was 24 weeks. It was just good. It was just good. I needed it. I needed it for where I was at that point in my life.
Yeah. What has it meant for you to First is reject passivity, right? What has it meant for you to reject passivity, and how have you seen that in your life and in others' lives?
Yeah, for me, being passive, some of the examples of if I had not rejected passivity, so, not leading and taking responsibility for my family. There's 100 million orphans in the world? Ish.
Something like that. 70 to 100
Yeah.
I've seen a number of times.
I can't save them all,
Yeah,
but I got 2.
right. So rejecting passivity has meant we have orphans in the world.
Yeah.
They don't have moms and dads in homes.
Yep.
They don't have a context that nurtures who God created them to be.
Yep.
So I'm going to do something about that.
Yep. Shaylee was another example. I mean, who in a relationship that I feel like she's like a kid sister. I mean, she lived with us for a while. We supported her while she was on missions.
Yeah.
We could have said no.
Yeah.
It would have been easier to say no than yes.
Sure. For those who don't know, Shaylee's an FCCer who's now married and in Michigan. I think
Michigan or Nashville?
Still Nashville. Has now moved to Nashville.
Yeah,
I
she's in
believe that's
Nashville.
right. Yes. Okay.
So at one point, we decided that we were putting my career on hold and staying in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And that, you can say, well, how's that being passive? Me dying to my career and accepting responsibility and leading courageously meant being the father and the husband I needed to be,
Right.
rather than who my employer was wanting me to be, which would have meant we would have probably been here 3 years tops.
And you were actually weighing in far more practical terms than people perhaps can even be aware, those things in terms of, I can do this and be this man for my family, be this husband and father for my family in these kinds of ways by staying.
Yeah.
Or I can add this much more time in my work schedule and demand from my employer and go there.
Yeah, and that was hard for a number of reasons. The allure of wealth,
More money.
It's essentially what it is, right?
More platform.
More platform.
People are always calling me from these big churches saying, Scott, we would love... I'm just kidding. Never happens.
They'd be rude not to.
Carry on with your actual story.
But my father kind of raised me and groomed me to be into corporate management. Mm-hmm. And, he passed away several years ago. And what boy doesn't want their dad to be proud of them? Even if you had a terrible relationship with your father,
yeah,
you still want your dad to say you're doing a good job. And I had a great relationship with my dad.
Yeah. Did you have to let some of your vision for yourself that was informed by Dad's vision for you sort of die in that process?
It's a little bit of the dying to self, the atrophy of the flesh. And, it's hard. But God is good. I mean, we pay our bills. We got lots of kids, and we still can pay the bills.
With 6 kids, you've got lots of bills.
Yeah.
What's a difficult challenge in life you've had to overcome?
So I would say the hardest thing I've ever done, was admit that I could not do life on my own. Like, God had to bring me to the end of myself, and I remember where I was and the exact situation when that happened. And I was 20, I was in college, I was dating a hot woman who I later married. And we, I felt like I had the world by the tail.
Yeah.
And a series of events happened, and I essentially failed myself, and I failed my future wife. And it was the first time I realized that I've done something that you can't recover from. I can't hide from this. And I can't trust myself. And I'd always trusted myself to be able to get out of any situation. Like, no matter how bad it got, I could get myself out. I could talk myself out. I could work myself out. I could whatever myself out.
Yeah.
And
you could man yourself out.
I could man myself out.
Or,
it's kind of funny because it's not really
energy myself
it's
out.
not really being a man,
but it's
right?
not an actual man, right? Your perception of what a man was.
Yeah, you can John Wayne yourself out, but I couldn't.
Right.
And so, I mean, that
John Wayne myself out.
That realization. I mean, that night I walked, forward in front of a bunch of strangers and made a confession of faith, and it was one of those. I best describe it as a Pauline experience. Like, I didn't want it. I wasn't pursuing it. God grabbed me, but he put me in a situation that he put me in a situation where I had no choice but to acknowledge his authority,
truth of the matter,
his authority, and my lack of ability. And people have asked me about my salvation experience. I couldn't have said no, and I'm thankful because I would have.
Yeah. So that regeneration experience was the death of the John Wayne, and
James Bond, the movies I grew up watching,
and eventually some of that was also your dad's perceptions of you, perhaps your own perception of your dad's perceptions that may not have been accurate. At a certain point in life, you realize, I think that was me more than them, and the death of those things to be the Mike Schubert that God's making you to be.
Yeah, and making, right? I'm not there yet.
Right.
I think I'll be just right, at the end of this life. I'll be exactly where he wanted me to get to. I continue to be obedient.
Mark Liebert wants to know who will win Saturday. I have no idea what that means, but I assume it has to do with Clemson and football or something like that.
Yeah, so my team is playing his team again.
Oh, okay.
And his team beat my team the first time around.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's Clemson over Florida?
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. Oh, duh, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know why I was
Except this time, our best 8 players will be on the field.
And they weren't before?
They weren't the first time.
So you will win?
I think there's going to be a...
Is Notre Dame good?
It's going to be a reckoning. Oh, they're excellent.
Really?
Their team is excellent.
That shows you how dumb I am.
They are better than they've been in the past. In the past, they've been really good, but they play a tough team and they falter.
Yeah, they did go through a number of years.
I think they're the real deal this year.
Really?
Their offensive and defensive lines are excellent, and it's going to be a thrashing.
Something I've been asking most folks most weeks is, what are you? Answer however you'd like. What are you seeing and learning because of COVID?
So to me, I don't think I've learned anything. I'll be honest. I think a lot of people haven't learned a lot. I think all we've seen is that people's fears have surfaced.
Okay.
And we see people living out their fears. I hear on social media, because I'm not on social media, you see the, here's how people respond in times of great adversity, when their greatest fears
So the pressure of the moment now is pressing on what was already there.
Was already there.
Is that what you mean by not learning but seeing what was already there?
Yeah. So you can probably get a sense of where I fall in this, in the whole thing, but it's real, and
sure,
it's a great opportunity for, just like Regen. In Regen, when you're forced to deal with reality, that's when God can do some good work.
Yeah.
And we've seen it in our church. We've seen a lot of people. We were talking about this the other day in the Elders Board, how many marriages that COVID has put extra pressure on, and things have gotten super hard, and people have come alongside them, and they will be stronger coming out of this. So it doesn't really matter what's going on.
We talked about 8 to 10 marriages that have been on the brink for a long time, many of them before COVID, that have pressed on this stuff for them, pressed on their relationship, that the body has been a part of keeping together.
Right.
And becoming stronger.
Yeah.
What have you seen and learned from serving at church, being an elder, being at FCC?
Life is messy. It's just messy.
Why
And
is that?
everybody's got mess.
Because you see that in leadership at a church.
You see it.
Yeah.
And it's not whether or not you've got it. It's not whether or not you recognize it in somebody else, but it's how you can display mercy and empathy to people and meet them wherever they're at and let them know that in spite of the hardness, Jesus has already won. Mm-hmm. And so if we've got a common denominator, a common foundation, there's lots of good things that can happen. And through this hardness, I mean, I've seen some amazing things.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that is super encouraging because it's so easy to get caught up in the death rate, and and the United States especially seems to have gotten our fair share of it, so to speak. So
yeah. Who have been key disciplers of you, for you, key spiritual mentors?
Sure, yeah.
People who taught you about relationship with God, etc.
Yeah, I look up to my little brother. He is super good, great father, super good spiritual leader, open about his faith. Had a buddy in college, Oliver Bruton, just a phenomenal dude. Let's see who else. I look up to Liebert. He knows way more of the Bible than I do.
Yeah.
Super good guy, and he got 3 great kids, so good family. So I mean, he's got the proof of his faith. All of our elders are great men. I mean, they really are. We're super fortunate to have the.
Yes.
People ask me if I'm one of the elders. I said, yeah, but I'm the bad elder. So.
That's not true. What is it about? And those are men you talked about. What is it about those men that you saw, or that was helpful for you, in your growth, in your spiritual development?
They have strong convictions and strong faith that no matter what the circumstances, their convictions and their faith define them, and their circumstances do not. All of those men do. And they've all had hard stuff happen.
That's rejecting passivity.
That's rejecting passivity and leading courageously in spite of conflict, confrontation.
Yeah, it's all of those things. It's rejecting passivity, leading courageously,
accepting
responsibility. Yeah, it's 3 of those 4. So, what do you think God's currently teaching you?
My most recent challenge is keeping my cool and speaking firmly but in control when my kids are out of control. And so they don't fear me, and that my stability hopefully becomes a piece of stability of their own that they can latch on to.
Right.
And I'm thinking of one child in particular, because my tendency is just to lash out. I mean, if there's something wrong, let's just deal with it. And kids can't always deal with it.
Right.
I mean, I say that like I do a great job of dealing with it. I don't always deal with it well, but my wife does an amazing job at this stuff, so I'm learning from her.
So being an unanxious presence.
Yeah.
For them in the moment when they need to be disciplined or something hasn't gone right, or they're anxious,
overwhelmed.
Yes, overwhelmed.
Overstimulated.
Yes. Now, and I think this is a particularly germane issue for parenting more and more nowadays.
Yeah.
We have a couple generations now of extremely anxious kids. Suicide rates are going up big time in the younger generations. Anxiety is through the roof. Depression is considerably worse than it had been for decades, literally decades. The internet, screens, these things that are discipling them in worldly ways have made them internally anxious.
Yep.
Many of them, and you're talking about some examples from your family, and we see some of this with our, especially one of our kids, but coming from traumatic places that may be substance abuse or something like that, trauma and abuse in their past, means they're having this anxiety stuff all the time. I think that's a really important and helpful piece for a lot of people out there.
Yeah. So I think 2 to 3 generations in a row have gotten really bad advice. The Gen Xers were told that if you work hard, and put in your efforts, you can be anything you want. And the problem is that's just not true.
You can be all that you can.
You can be all that you can be. And the problem is for a lot of people that didn't pan out. And so you wonder why depression rates are up.
Right.
Is because, they bought into this lie, and then life, sucker punched them. And now the news, the last 2 generations, they're constantly bombarded with pictures of perfection.
Right.
And you only see the best out of those people.
Absolutely.
And so
it's
that's
a world
how
of lies.
You're constantly trying to measure yourself against it, and you can't.
No.
You can't.
It's not real life.
It's chasing the Joneses, and it's just impossible.
Right. All of that has ratcheted up like crazy with the proliferation of the information age.
So we wonder why depression is 3 times worse than it used to be.
Right.
Look at your measuring stick.
So
I'd be depressed too if I measured myself that way.
Couple last questions. One has come in that says, "What advice would you give for parenting adult children?"
Ooh. So if you've got kids at any age, you realize that the relationship slowly transitions from do as I say to, try to imitate what I do to ultimately being a coach, right? Because you don't want to tell your adult kids what to do. You want them to be fully functioning people, and you want to be able to come alongside them and coach them and give them advice. So that's been a little bit of a hard transition for me. Asking. So rather than saying you should have done this, or you could say, so what, as these events transpired, like what were you thinking? Like where was your head? Not, what was your context around? Like how did you filter in the situation that led to these decisions? And
so more of a coming alongside, asking questions. How did you get here?
And you've got to create a context
coaching.
And you got to create. You can't just jump into like feedback and give someone the feedback sandwich. Like you did this well, but I think you could have done this better. But I'm really proud of you for doing this. Right, the feedback sandwich.
Yeah.
You've got to be what they want you to be. And you've got to know their love language. If one of your kids' love language is gifts and it's not yours, you better figure out a way to go out and take them out to meals and give them free things or whatever. And if their love language is time, you got to figure out a way to do that.
And then when they become old enough and they're senior citizens and there are things that they can't do for themselves or that they can't decide for themselves, for various reasons, with enough information, or they can't physically do things, you begin to have to go back to, hey, this is what we're going to do because, so let me lead you through that, as if they're a little bit younger. So you coach for a while, and then they get to a point where they can't do certain things, and you're having to get them to do things, and you're saying hard things they don't want to hear. At a certain age.
Yeah.
None of our kids are there.
My kids aren't there so much yet. My goal is that for our house to always be a safe place.
Yeah.
It's just safe. If you need to be there, Michael's being in college, but college really isn't what college we think of college as being, and being virtual. I mean, it's been good having him around it, and I want him to feel wanted.
Sure. Yeah. I was particularly thinking about not necessarily even adult children, but parents.
Yeah.
Who, like one's own parents, and having to parent parents. Yeah. Which is different than adult children.
I'm not done that well.
I was just thinking as you were talking, you get to a certain point where you're parenting your own parents, and you've got more adult children to have to parent.
Yeah.
So last question, what are you excited or encouraged about?
The new year always brings new possibilities. And for me, that means, like, where are we going this year? Like, where are me and the kids going in a vehicle?
You're always scheming with what's my next project plan, journey, etc.
Exactly. This year, my wife and I, instead of doing like a beach trip for a weekend by ourselves, we did an overlanding trip, which was like the first time she's gone with me, which was just fun.
Yeah.
The kids want to do Utah to Oregon next year.
Cool.
Just trying to figure out what to do. There's a group out of West Virginia they do guided trips. So we're thinking about maybe doing one with those guys, which would be interesting because then I wouldn't be leading, which would be a weird way to live life.
Are you going to like that, or
I don't
for a
know.
change?
I don't know. We'll see. It would be fun. I'll be able to experience it differently. Like when I was teaching Faith how to drive, and she's in the driver's seat and I'm in the passenger seat. It's different going down the road when you're not responsible for staying between the lines. You see things differently, right? Like I never realized that was around the corner there because you can't be looking at it while you're driving, right? So the few times I'm not in charge on stuff like this, or someone else is in charge for a little bit, it's just a completely different perspective, and it's fun. So, plus the guys you would be going with are pros at this. So I expect to pick up
see new
tips
things and learn some new strategies.
Growing up, I love to look at maps, just old maps. I've got a couple of maps in my office.
What is this map word of which you speak?
So I love old maps.
They're right here. All the maps are right here.
Yeah, but like a map of the railways in the United States in 1910.
Yeah, I remember looking at maps a ton as a kid.
It was a different way to get around.
Yeah.
I've got a map of where my family was from when they lived there in the mid-1800s in Germany.
Yeah.
All the words and it's a French map of Germany. So it's another country's perspective of where my family's from. It's cool to see that stuff because you learn, just by looking at those maps, you will learn things that you would not pick up on. And I'm really good at picking up nuances. So
I remember as a kid looking at maps as a part of the imagination experience. Imagining what was there and reading encyclopedia because, World Book. Pre-Wikipedia and pre-Google Earth, where the map, you can just click on the place and then you see the actual place.
Yeah.
For me, it was a look at this and think, wonder how, and reading about it.
Right.
It was a part of the imaginative process for me, but...
I still buy a Rand McNally map every year. A physical map.
Are you serious?
And put it in the back of put it behind my seat in my truck.
Just in case.
Just in case. And I'll pull it out a couple times a year.
When you're doing real overlanding or
when you're
something
doing
like that,
real trips,
need it.
One map is really not enough. You need to see different things to kind of get a sense.
Yeah.
We tried to get to the Hoover Dam last year.
Yeah.
We couldn't because it was locked down. But we pulled up all 6 of our maps, including our online stuff, and tried to see if there a back road that we can sneak in, because the guys with guns at the front gate don't seem to want us to let us through the main way.
Did you really try to?
Yeah. We drove around it, and we had off-roading maps that most people don't have access to.
Don't try this at home.
So
when the guys at the front have the guns at the gates.
Yeah.
Speaking of guns, let's end on this.
Well, the Grand Canyon was locked down, but we still got to the rim. So as an example of
that's cool.
You figure it out.
Yeah. I accidentally lied.
Uh-oh.
I have one more question. Rumor has it that you recently had some sort of transaction that happened in a parking lot that involved weaponry. What is that?
It is not illegal to sell ammunition or to be the purchaser of it.
So it's nothing.
And because of the political shenanigans,
you can't buy.
You can't find ammo right now.
9mm.
Oh, so if you want to go
anywhere,
you want to go to the range, go blinking. It's hard to. I mean, BB is about the only thing that's cheap right now.
With that, thank you for joining us for Coffee Convos.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all for being with us. Join us in 2-3 Wednesdays from today. We're going to take a break for the next couple weeks because of the holidays, because of Christmas and New Year's. So join us beginning of January. Thanks for being with us.
All right, cool.